fast talker, so we're going to get ourselves off to a great start. And our presenter right behind me is as well. So I think we're in for a really good session. And I'm really excited to be able to introduce our speaker. And I know from the listserv chatter and from speaking with many of you that we are all developing strategies to move our performance management systems forward. I've heard this quote recently, and I'm wondering if anyone else has. Data is the new currency. Anybody? Show of hands. Have you heard that? A couple folks, yeah. So I was wondering what that really meant. And for me, I think it means that it's just a valuable resource and it's there for us to use. And so I'd ask you, before we see this next session with Yana, how really are we maximizing our data sets in our organizations? And especially those that we're creating. Everybody's creating performance management systems or are trying to figure out what we're going to do with those now that we have them. And so how do we really transform this data into some kind of useful information for our elected officials, for our citizens, so that we can use it really for resourcing decisions, priority decisions, engaging with our residents. I mean, it feels like, at least for me sometimes, it feels like we have such an information overload. Anybody? Information overload. I'm like constantly looking at information, at data, at spreadsheets, and trying to figure out what they mean. And so, fortunately, for all of us, I think there's a really good, easy solution for that, and that is for us to open our eyes so that we can see trends and patterns and be able to really look at those connections that matter and really design information so that it makes sense. It makes sense to us. It makes sense to our managers. It makes sense to our department directors. It makes sense to the citizens and to our elected officials, so that they can make those priorities and decisions, and then they can make those resourcing decisions. They can work through their strategic planning. And so I would just leave you with that data is absolutely meaningless without content or context. You can't look at a spreadsheet and know something. You have to use those data sets and correlate them to really make that data useful. And so data visualization is really the way that we need to be moving as a profession to really engage our citizens and engage our elected officials and tell our story. It is a beautiful thing, absolutely beautiful. Data is a beautiful thing. And so finally, I want to make one more point before I turn it over. What happens when we take that data and we put it up on dashboards or we make our fancy reports? What happens after that, I would ask? What are you doing after that? What happens when your lights, your green lights and your amber lights and your red lights turn amber and red? What are you doing as an organization really that will improve performance? And those performance measures in and of themselves are not improving your performance. It is really the analyzing of those data sets and trending them, visualizing them for your citizens and for your elected officials, and building strategies then, looking at them and building strategies around performance improvement. Because ultimately we want to become organizations that are built on quality, that are built on excellence. And so that's what we're shooting for in Fayetteville. I'm not going to take up any more of our time because Ms. Yana here has a lot of information to share with us. I will say that I brought a few of our performance reports. There are just a couple on your table. We also have a program called the PRIDE program, and that's our performance management system. We developed these things about 1.5 years ago, so they're kind of new. But they're our first shot at it, and we are looking forward to improving ourselves and looking forward to gaining some tools that we can move that forward. And so I'd like to go ahead and introduce at this time our guest speaker. We are very fortunate to have Ms. Yana McConaty with us today. She is a co-founder and principal of Neubrain. She has operational responsibility for the business analytics and performance management consulting services, and she provides strategic direction to Neubrain. In addition, Yana is a certified OLAP, multi-dimensional analysis, ERP, financial and dynamic enterprise modeling consultant. She has over 17 years of experience in information technology and consulting, budgeting and planning, and performance management and business analytics. Yana authored numerous publications and white papers and research items. She frequently presents, which is why we're so happy to have her here, on the topics of performance management and planning. during various industry events and forums. Yana also actively contributes to the content of the MBA level classes related to the discipline of business intelligence and performance management at national universities and schools. And so Yana is here today to talk to us about business analytics and data visualization. And with that, welcome, Yana.
Thank you very much, Rebecca and the committee for inviting me to participate in this event. Today I'm going to take a slightly different approach versus talking about holistically about data analytics and the terms and sort of being a little bit abstract. I want to be very tactical. And what I've designed today is a crash course on data visualization and dashboard design. After this hopefully 45-minute crash course, you'll be able to take a look at your reports and dashboards and pretty much all the information that you're preparing with a different set of eyes. Or at least know, you will be able to recognize some of the things that you currently do and do them differently or in an improved way. So it is really, today the goal of this training, I should say, is to provide you with a basic knowledge of information visualization and dashboard design, and also inspire you to create the best visualization possible in your line of work. So why do I need to do that? Why do I need to know this? What is it? Why is it important? Visualization is becoming increasingly important as a means of business communication. And it's imperative that expertise in data visualization is acquired. Many of you are in various stages of either financial report or dashboard design, and you, regardless of the stage you're in, you need to know the basics. Why? Research says that dashboards often failed or delivered a fraction of the business benefits and the insight needed to monitor a business. Why? The root of the problem is not in technology. It's not, at least it's not primarily, but in poor data visualization, poor data representation. So what can we do about it? Why? Someone must bring that expertise to the table so that you can design the reports and the presentations in a way that are meaningful. And it's all because, this is my favorite, a man paints with his brain and not his hands. Same thing applies to the dashboard design. Technology will not solve the world hunger. It will not make things better. You really have to spend some time visualizing and understanding what needs to go into the content of that report, dashboard, etc. So what we'll learn today: what is the BI dashboard, how to categorize dashboards, how to analyze data in dashboards, 10 common mistakes in dashboard design, 5 characteristics of well-designed dashboards, principles of visual perception. We're going to go a little deeper there into psychology, and goals in the visual design process, how to select the right display medium, dashboard implementation methodology. And finally, we'll take a look at a few samples in the public sector of how you can use visualization to display performance management information, display your metrics. But first, let's begin with the basics. Let's explore the relationship between analytics, interactive visualization, and dashboards. In commercial sector, the key to competitive advantage these days lies in the ability to turn the data into information that is suitable for each decision maker and deliver that information in a timely manner. In public sector, the goals are slightly different, but there are still data is becoming more and more important for your short-term and long-term strategic planning, resource management, fraud protection, and many other goals. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Business analytics is very important in that. It plays an important role in this transformation. It's a set of technologies that allows you to transform data into useful information. Interactive visualization is a way to make business analytics technology more insightful and more usable. Interactive visualization is basically an analytical capability that's presented most often through a set of dashboards or scorecards. So let's start with the fact that dashboard and reports and this graphics, it's not new. It's been, we've been using graphics to present quantitative information for a long time. Here's the example of one of the earliest quantitative graphs, hand-drawn by William Playfair in 1786. And this gentleman right here, since we're talking about the basics, is believed to have designed the world's first bar, line, and pie charts. Now I'm gonna show you my favorite. I actually have a picture in my office. Another example. In 1861, Charles Joseph Menard created probably the best statistical graph ever drawn. This mapping chart portrays the losses of Napoleon's army in the Russian campaign of 1812, and beginning at the Polish border, the thick band shows the size of the army and the path of Napoleon's retreat right there. If I can get this to work. Let's see. There, right here. Shows basically that depicts the size of the army to the temperature. So this is the probably one of the most famous charts, graphs that I'm sure you may have seen or not, but I really have this one in my office. So let's start with what is a BI dashboard? And I'm going to ask you, who wants to volunteer for an answer? No penalties here. In fact, I'm offering an award. I've seen some really good desserts in their coffee shop, so I'm buying. Who wants to take a crack at giving me a definition, or at least you are in your own words? Okay.
I'll give it a shot. It's a visualization of your strategic. I'm at a loss for words, and I'm not talking yet, but it's going to give a visualization of metrics in some sort of graphic way, showing positive, negative, that sort of thing.
Very good, very good. What is the difference then of what you just described than a traditional report? What would make it different? How they're different? Because that is true. What you just mentioned, it's absolutely true. But what is the difference between a dashboard and a report? You're right, yes. Mostly graphics are versus data grids and tables, absolutely. But the report may also contain graphics and data grids. So what is that definition? What makes it different? All right, we're going. If you guys can crack that, there's going to be 2 desserts. Any volunteers? No?
A single snapshot of the most relevant information for decision makers.
You're getting there. You're getting towards the physical, something physical. So I'm not going to torture anymore. So the difference is really the dashboard always has to fit on a single computer screen. It cannot go long, it can go wide. It just has to be monitored at a glance. So the real difference is that it needs to fit on that single screen. So let me give you a full definition. Dashboards are visual displays. Information is presented visually, usually visually, as a combination of text and graphics, but with the emphasis on graphics. Dashboards display the information needed to achieve specific objectives. To that first person who was saying about risks, and yes, there's usually an objective that the dashboard helps us to achieve or solve for. A dashboard should fit on a single computer screen, otherwise it is a report. The objective of a dashboard is to absorb the needed information quickly and effortlessly. And usually the information presented on the screen is the information is presented through the abbreviations, summaries, and exceptions. So it's not a long sort of piece of information. And it's supposed to open the door for discovery using the analytical interaction or navigation. And we'll talk about it in just a few minutes. The challenge of the dashboard is to squeeze a huge information of useful and disparate data into this one screen so that you can basically comprehend it quickly and effortlessly. And I apologize, we have a little bit of a constraints. what I see is not what you see in terms of the display. There we go, visualization. Now, dashboards can be used to monitor any types of data and to support any sets of business objectives. There are many ways to categorize dashboards. So let's take a look at these taxonomies. The dashboards could be categorized by role: strategic, executive, analytical, operational. Type of data: finance, sales, marketing, hospitality, government. Type of measure: this is important because some folks are confused. What's the difference between balanced scorecard and a dashboard, or Six Sigma and a dashboard, or BFO, budgeting for outcomes, or priority-based budgeting and a dashboard that we're displaying? So basically, dashboard is just going to display the type of the data or the methodology that's being used to compile that information and display that information, if that makes sense. And then, of course, span of data: enterprise-wide, departmental, individual, frequency, interactivity, static or interactive, display medium, text, graphic, combination. There are many other different types or ways of how you can categorize dashboards. Now let's take a look at the examples. This is just an example of a commercial, traditional commercial executive dashboard. Covers market share and penetration. This is a CFO-centric dashboard that uses certain charts that I will discuss in a few minutes, geared towards understanding revenue and other financial indicators. This is a budget manager dashboard. Now this hospitality, probably not relevant. Department of Defense. Strategy map. This is a commercial representation of or this is a typical representation of a strategy map in the commercial world. A lot of folks are in in the commercial sector leverage balanced scorecards, and that would be a strategy map that goes along with the balanced scorecard. Now, right now with the more heavy usage of priority-based budgeting and outcome-based budgeting or performance-based budgeting, things have shifted to where organizations are relying less on balanced scorecards, but relying more on the methodologies that I just mentioned. This is an example of a performance dashboard that could be used by a government or municipal organization to understand the operational effectiveness of the program and the status of the program towards the achievement of the goals. And I will dive into this in greater detail based on some sample data that City of Fayetteville kindly provided to us. We will dive into this one in just a few minutes. Budgeting for outcomes. Again, yet another methodology that a municipality can choose to deploy to help them connect dollars to outcomes. In that case, there are certain representations that could be used to present the dashboard as well. Performance-based budgeting. This is not really a dashboard, it's an analytical report, but it's a very short report that helps, that goes into the next stage, which is predictive budgeting. Ability to price out the cost of the 911 call or reverse 911 call and anticipate or work with your police department to anticipate the crime rate, knowing how much money do you need to respond to a 911 call or a 311 call, and based on that understanding, predict the amount of money that you would need to meet that goal or objective of a specific department or program, etc. Now, how do we analyze data in dashboards? Well, first of all, quantitative measures. Customer support, for example. Number of support calls, resolved cases, customer satisfaction, call duration, call wait time, maybe in your CRM system, customer relationship management system. The next one, time-based analysis, year to date, month to date, yesterday to date. Then, as Rebecca was pointing out, enrichment of data through comparison. Multiple instances of a measure or a temporary instance of a measure, or comparing one measure against or versus another relevant measure, or a measure of one group to another group. Enrichment through evaluation. This is where we are going to add visual objects like alerts, traffic lights, to help us understand the meaning of the data quicker. non-quantitative analysis, top 5 projects to complete, or top 5 issues, etc. Now, let's start with common mistakes in dashboard design, as understanding what we are doing wrong or what we have done wrong can hopefully help us avoid these mistakes. The very first one, choosing the deficient measure. The second one, insufficient context for the data. Third, encoding quantitative data incorrectly. Fourth, excessive details, exceeding the boundaries of a screen, inappropriate display media, arranging the data poorly and highlighting important data inefficiently, cluttering with unnecessary objects, and unattractive display. Let's break down each of those in detail. Choosing a deficient measure. Choosing the deficient measure does not refer to the content of the measure, but rather to the display of the measure. A measure is deficient if it's not the one that most clearly and efficiently communicates the meaning that the dashboard viewer should discern. It can be accurate, but not yet the best choice. For example, let's take a look at 2 numbers representing sales and margin. In the example above, we need to concentrate harder to absorb the data because large numbers, and I like to use this term, is outside of our mental range. Now at the bottom here, if you take a look, the example below, it allows us to process the information much quicker than the raw numbers. Why? Because of the choice of fonts. Even the choice of fonts could be damaging to your perception. Numbers are rounded to the same level. This is one of the key things that if you are to continue researching this topic, get some books, and I can make some recommendations on really good books. And rounding is one of them, which is helpful in the digestion of information, but you have to do the right rounding. There's concepts of cosmetic rounding versus financial rounding. So think about it, rounding is always our friend in displaying data in dashboards. And then finally, the numbers are structured in columns. Let's take a look at another example. If the dashboard viewer only needs to see or understand to what degree actual sales and margins differ from last year, it would be more direct to express variance as a percent rather than leaving it to the viewer to focus their attention and calculate the difference. In this case, the second case, we are clearly focused to what is important, and this data is communicated in a manner that's directly intelligible. Now, our metrics and measures need so-called supporting cast to succeed. It's not enough to state them without the context. Compared to what? Is it good? Is it bad? How good and bad? Are we on track? Are we doing better than we've been doing in the past? Or are we doing worse than we forecasted? Supplying the right context for key measures makes the difference between the numbers that just sit on the screen and those that enlighten and inspire action. And that's what Rebecca was referring to. The dashboard or the report, it needs to inspire action. And of course, operationally, you need to know what that action should be and establish that pattern of how to act on certain things. Now, sometimes graphical representation of quantitative data designed in a way that displays the data inaccurately. And I took this example from very famous analytical magazines. And some data that's coming out of here is actually from Economist or from USPTO.gov website. So it's not old information. It's really like you can dig through and find things that people do exceptionally well, and then find things that that are lacking. But that's what we're here for, to discuss this. So let's take a look at the first graph. There are 2 errors apparent in the construction of the graph. Anybody wants to take a shot at it? Yeah?
Your years are consecutive.
Absolutely, intervals, exactly, on the x-axis, yeah? And what else?
Change in scale.
Well, that's the change in scale, exactly. And then the other one is that the years on the x-axis do not have the same intervals, and then we also have the y-axis does not start with 0, if you can notice that. So the compression in the first 8 years make the drop significantly steeper, indicating the wrong message. And if the chart was drawn correctly, you will see a completely different message. So with just like that, you can make the data inadvertently communicate the wrong message. Or the right message. Now, exceeding the boundaries of the screen. This is the actual dashboard from a customer of ours. It's a national retail chain. They're a very good customer of ours, and you know the clothes that this retailer makes. And we fight with retailers. They want to see 37 weeks of data on this one screen, and they keep calling it a dashboard, and we keep telling you it's not. And how on earth can you see it? So, despite the fact that it's a product of our creation, I should list it here because something powerful happens. I call it the aha moment in our brain when we see things together as a system. And it's the beautiful moment when you're designing something and you're familiar with the data set, but then you put it in a certain view, in a certain angle, in a certain abbreviated form, and it just clicks for you. And it becomes part of your daily routine that you want to reference this report because it helps you organize your thought process. So this aha moment and looking at things and seeing them as a system, it's definitely a moment in the dashboard creator's life that you cherish, so to say. So again, no need for scrolling, no need between switching multiple screens. That's definitely this one goes hand in hand. Excessive details. Dashboards almost always require fairly high-level information to support the viewer's need for a quick scan or a quick overview. Too much detail or measures that are expressed too precisely, they slow down our processing, and it sort of doesn't serve the benefit, so it becomes a report. Okay, now to my favorite, highlighting important data effectively. This is an actual dashboard from USPTO.gov website, which they're very proud of. So when you look at the dashboard, your eyes should immediately be drawn to the information that's important. And even if it's not residing on a very prominent area of your report, it should still be viewed and perceived very easily. Because the whole, again, challenge of the dashboard is presenting large amount of information in a limited space. So, organizing it and removing the clutter, and we call it non-data pixels, such as dark backgrounds or too much color. It just deters you from understanding what is supposed to be displayed here. When you look at this data, can you interpret it? Probably not right away. But inappropriate display medium. This one is very prominent in every report that I've seen, financial report, a strategic report that municipalities prepare. There's a very heavy use of pie charts. Three-dimensional. I'm not a big fan of three-dimensional, but sometimes it's there. And there are this is a very common mistake. So in this example, the choice of two pie charts representing a percentage of people using a certain method of transportation to get to work. So the first one does not communicate that message as clearly. If the intent was to help compare the methods of transportation used between two different years, then the column chart would have been a better choice. So for comparison, and in a moment we'll be discussing and selecting the best display medium. For comparison, if the task is to compare, then we should probably select a different medium or consider selecting a different medium. Arranging the data poorly. This is another example of a graph with several flaws in arranging data. Just flipping the graph would make the graph more readable, but there's other drawbacks or challenges that I'm sure you can already articulate as well. Clutter with unnecessary object. This is an example again of cluttering a display with useless decoration. Anything that doesn't add meaning to the data must be minimized or thrown out. Especially those flashy visual effects. I know they're cool, and it was cool about 5-7 years ago when that technology started to come out. But now, let's minimize them. They have definitely a very undermining effect on communication. Color. Color is often misused in the dashboard designs to the degree that I'm compelled to share some of the principles that of its use that works for us and for other organizations. Some colors are soothing and others are not. Knowing the difference is quite important. And the general rule is use subdued colors and tones and only use bold colors when you want this information to stand out. And you will see how pretty your graphs are going to become when you don't use these contrasting, green, red, bold colors. Try to leverage the same color scheme, just different shade or hue, and you'll see the difference in how your information will be in the presentation. So once we've talked about the mistakes, let's just reverse and talk about the 5 characteristics of well-designed dashboards. So represent the data accurately, present all the data needed to see and understand what's meaningful, provide appropriate context for interpreting the meaning of the data, present nothing that isn't needed, and represent the data in a way that is easy for the eyes to perceive and for the brain to interpret. So the guiding principle in all cases is elegance through simplicity. Display the data as clearly and as simple as possible and avoid the necessary distraction. Now, let's go and dig a little deeper here. So why is it happening? Why can't we interpret certain things and we can't interpret others? So this all comes from understanding of our memory and perception. I have a little Dory here that suffers from short-term memory losses. So just like computers, our brains use various types of storage to hold the information while it's being processed. In some cases, it stores for later use. There are 3 fundamental types of memory: iconic, short-term, and long-term. Iconic is very similar to the graphics buffer in the computer. It briefly stores what the eyes see until it's either moved to the short-term memory for conscious processing or discarded as non-essential. Short-term memory is like RAM. So if iconic is like computer buffer, then short-term it's like RAM. It's beautiful, it's fast, but it's very limited in its capacity. It's like my laptop. It's RAM hard drive. Fast processing can't store a lot of data. Have to have an external hard drive. So long-term memory could be compared to that hard drive. Its storage capacity is much greater. It's definitely not as fast for processing, but it's very flexible in the information retrieval as far as storing this data and information for future usage. Now, why are we talking about it? When compared to other senses, human visual system has enormous power. The eyes and visual cortex of the brain form this massive parallel processor computer that provides this high bandwidth channel into a cognitive center. At higher levels of processing, perception and cognitions are closely, basically interrelated. That's why the understanding and seeing are used synonymously. However, our visual system has its own rules. And as a result, if the information is presented in certain ways that is not conducive to our brain, it's discarded. And if it's presented in others, it's well received and well memorized. So if we are to follow those perception-based rules, then we can present the data in such a way that the information stands out and the pattern is understood. If we disobey, then this data is becoming incomprehensible and misleading. So don't think if you're looking at a dashboard and you don't understand it, there's something wrong with you. Half the time, there's something wrong with the way it's designed. So it looks complicated, or it's like, oh, it's not for my brain. You're smart people, trust me. It's because we have a certain way that we are expected to logically understand the data that you haven't spent too much time with, right? There are some dashboard designers that intimately understand the data, but they have not understood that you have to have certain rules embedded into the dashboard design, so that others that don't intimately work with this data can quickly understand it. So, principles of visual perception, of thinking with our eyes. Short-term memory is where this real work of sense-making is done. New data is passed from our senses, from our eyes and brain sensors, and the old data is swapped from the long-term memory, working much faster, sort of at the conscious speed of thought. Giving our cognitive abilities, it's incredible to know that the short-term memory can do all of this. So what does this mean? Short-term memory, again, is where the real work is done. I'm going to skip here the section of science so that I don't make anybody fall asleep. And if you need coffee, just grab some more. Short-term memory is temporary. Information is flushed in and out. And only a portion of it is dedicated to visual information. So what does it mean? There's a set of principles that I'm going to share with you that can help you understand why we perceive certain things in a certain way. One rule that we need to know: our short-term memory has a limited capacity. 3 to 7 chunks of visual information could be perceived at once. It goes to the reading comprehension as well, but we're talking about visual right now. So what does it mean? So if you're designing a dashboard, try not to incorporate more than 7 elements on it, 7 distinct elements. 7 is actually topping it. General rule for a normal average person is actually 4. So if you have 4 themes going on that are presented on your dashboard, or 4 major KPIs, that's pretty much enough. If you have more than that, consider splitting it into a different dashboard. If you want some information or some of the data to stand out, please encode it with certain pre-attentive attributes. Now, a little test here. How many number 5s do you see? Quickly. Okay. So how many?
5.
5? All right. Someone's 4. Okay, let's see. There are 5 of them. It's an exercise that illustrates the difference between the 2 types of visual perception. We took a few seconds and we were trying to count how many times number 5 appears. And by applying the simple visualization principle of encoding the data graphically through hue, for example, you were able to find this information faster. Again, it's just a quick example. So the rods and cones that populates our retina are tuned to detect a limited set of visual attributes very fast. The 2 of them, the primary 2, are shape and color. There's, of course, generally speaking, not quantitative information, but generally speaking, it's color, position, and form. The best attributes, however, for quantitative encoding It's actually 2D position, two-dimensional position, and length from the common baseline. This is what I mean. These are the attributes that we should use to display quantitative values rather than sizes and colors intensities wherever we can. So again, simplicity is the key, and knowing certain patterns of how our brain works. So how do we know all that? And if you want to, on the weekend or when you go on vacation, you feel like you want to read some science, Gestalt principles. So there are distinct principles. They're called Gestalt principles of perception. And Gestalt psychology was developed actually in the 1920s by 3 German psychologists, Weiheimer, Kafka, and Kohler. And the word Gestalt means the essence of a shape. So these Gestalt principles demonstrate a set of consistent behaviors or rules to visual perception. There's no sort of definitive list of the Gestalt principles. When you start researching this topic, you'll see, is it 112 or 120? It's very hard to spot out how many of them because they're so closely intertwined. But in another word, the other term for these Gestalt principles is perceptual groupings, so principles of perceptual groupings. So in some cases, these groupings are strong and others are weak. They're more like tendencies. So what are those perceptual groupings? Enclosure, for example. Enclosing objects using a border helps them to belong to each other. This helps us think that they belong together. What does it mean? So if you're designing a dashboard and you have 3-4 chunks of different information sets, you might want to create a border in between of them to sort of know that there's one set and there's another set and there's another set. So this is just how you would, I'm trying to make make this principle apply to you or speak to you a little bit. Or proximity, using white spaces to separate groups. So instead of borders, consider white spaces in between. Or similarity, connectivity. Connectivity is actually very useful in financial statements. Whoops, my apologies. So we're not going to go into that sort of theory too much, but just please know that they exist, and if you need to Google them. And I think, again, helping understand these principles, and some of them are stronger than others, help you design your reports and Excel spreadsheets much better. Now, just again, a little piece of history. Example of pre-attentive and attentive visual perception. So this picture is designed with a full understanding of Gestalt principles of perceptual grouping. Basically, this gala contemplating the Mediterranean Sea at 20 meters becomes a portrait of Abraham Lincoln. So you probably have seen this picture before. Now, so what are the goals in that visual design process? So the first one is, again, condense the information via summarizations and exceptions. Then determine the appropriate data ink ratio. Again, what does it mean? What does this mean? Reduce unnecessary non-data pixels or ink. If you have a gray background, and what I'll show you next as an example, will have a gray background. But generally speaking, you shouldn't have unnecessary background color shades or anything that deters you from understanding the meaning of the data. So reduce the unnecessary non-data pixels and enhance the data pixels. The next one is select the best display medium, chart, graph combo. Then finally, design individual visual components of the selected medium to display the information and its message as clearly as possible. So, selecting the right medium, a display medium. A common problem with tables and graphs graphs is the excessive presence of visual content that doesn't represent the actual data. So whenever quantitative information is presented, the data itself should stand out without just the distraction. So knowing some of the effective displays for certain types of relationships helps us basically create better dashboards or reports, etc. So let's talk about table. Table works best when it's used to, when you need to look up the individual values, or you need to compare the individual values, and the values must be expressed precisely. That's when you would use table. And you can have dashboards with tables and grids if you need to know the data or the value precisely, especially in the police and fire. In their cases, it's very important to know an exact data point. So if you're designing a dashboard for those departments or business units, you still can combine graphs and text, but be very vigilant about the precision of the data that's required. Now, the graph works best when the message is contained in the shape of the data, such as pattern, trend, relationship, or exception. There are 7 common quantitative relationships in graph. And with rare exceptions, if you know all 7, and you know most common graphs that are used to display a certain relationship, you are in business. Now, so what are they? Time series, ranking, hard to whole, nominal comparison, deviation, and distribution. And I'm not going to go through each of them in great detail, but we'll just take a few samples and you'll get the idea. So line and point charts. They're typically used to display time series analysis. Lines to emphasize the overall pattern, and points connected by lines to slightly emphasize individual values, while still highlighting that overall pattern. And you should always place time on the horizontal axis. I think one of the graphs that I displayed before in the common mistakes, where the time series was on the basically vertical axis, and that's a big no-no because you're talking about the big span of data points, the way our brain for some reason works, it's a horizontal axis. Now, the spark line. Spark line is something that presents, again, trends and variation associated with some measurements such as an average temperature or stock market activity. And it's presented in this very simple and condensed and small way. Spark lines are very useful, again, for representation of some financial data. You'll see them if you go to yahoostock.com or something like that. Just a variation, actually, of the graph before. Now, next one, column and bar charts. It's used to display a simple comparison of categorical subdivisions of one or more measures in no particular order. So column and bar charts are our friends. There's so much you can present using those two. It's incredible. It's one of the most commonly used. Now, bar charts. It's a categorical subdivisions of a measure compared to a reference measure and expresses a difference between them. In this case, quantitative scale must be set to 0. Very common, variance to plan. So if your plan is a baseline, then your variance against plan would be up and down. Bar charts. The relationship that it displays is ranking. Bars could be horizontal or vertical, and to highlight higher values, sort them in the descending order, and to highlight low values, sort them in the ascending order. Very helpful. A lot of folks just leave the bars all over around, etc. Just doing simple sorting helps your digestion, helps the interpretation of data. Now, pie and donut charts. Yay! I see them a lot. Hard to whole measures of individual categorical subdivisions as ratios to the whole. And donut charts are functionally identical. Sometimes they're a little bit overused, because they state the obvious, okay? If you're presenting the data to someone who is not familiar with your data at all, and they would be curious, you know, to know that there's 3 elements or 3 measures, that's fine. But if you're stating the obvious, it's very hard to spot the actual value of the pie visually, so to say. So if you're communicating to the public and you want to display the sources of funding or fund types, yeah, maybe, because the public doesn't know, so for them it would be kind of insightful. But if you're presenting information on, I don't know, something that your department is ultimately familiar with, and you need to really understand the difference and the variances, do not consider that. The more data points you have, the harder it is to measure and gauge what the slice of that pie is. Stacked column, use stacked bars only when you must display numbers of the whole as well as the parts. Very common way to present area chart. Again, part to whole and time series. Histograms. This is getting statistical a little bit. Counts of something per categorical subdivision of intervals of quantitative values. So how many consumers age 15 to 24 buy clothing? You know, histograms are pretty interesting graphs for statistical analysis. Rater chart, again, comparison, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. Bubble charts, correlation. A lot of correlation is displayed through bubble charts. And I'm just skipping through it because I'm sure you can Google a lot of them. But at least it leads you, I know you are very busy folks and you've got your daily job, so it's hard for you to go and start Googling educating. So I'm just trying to give you the path and you can go and research more. Combination graph. Again, this is a graph from the actual retail customer that we have. It's a combination chart with a mixture of different chart types that displays the information that you need to see. In fact, this one is interesting because it shows us sales, it shows us the markdowns for a retailer and correlates sales with markdowns, and then the yellow bar is actually on order inventory. So if you're taking a look, okay, if I'm to discount more, would they buy more? Or if the product is selling and I can see how it's responding, do I have enough on order? So there's an objective of this particular graph. Speedometer. Okay. For example, red, yellow, and green areas of this chart indicate whether the values are acceptable or unacceptable. And the chart resembles a speedometer. People that don't know how to manage performance or merely don't care to tend to display it correctly, they prefer these kind of dashboards. I mean, it's really a blast from the past, I should say. Why? Because we can't really, it doesn't tell us anything. It's not because we're not smart or what have you. It just doesn't present the information in the best way. And I'm not going to bash it too much, but it's not elegant, and it's not displaying the information as truly as we need to. So what's instead? Well, I'm going to share you, or I'm going to tell you about the bullet graph. Bullet graph, it's sort of the new wave. I'm sure maybe, who knows about the bullet graphs? There you go. Good. It's developed by Stephen Few, who is actually a visualization guru, and it helps us sort of understand the actual number, the actual performance, and compare it to the baseline in a much better way. So look it up. It's a much more effective way of tracking your performance metrics than the speedometers. That's all I can tell you. in the interest of time. Tree maps, very common these days. Heat maps you're probably very familiar as well. Now, geographical maps. Sometimes the important stories that numbers tell us often involve location, where things have occurred. And when we display information on the map, we can sort of combine abstract and physical data. Quantitative information is abstract, physical data, locations obviously physical. So how do we actually, how do we present this data on the map that sort of allows us to draw conclusions? Well, there's usually two approaches to display quantitative information on the map that works best. It's color intensity and size of the bubble. If you see some other things like buildings stack on top or little objects, 3 peppers, 4 peppers, I mean, I've seen everything that's going on, but yeah, they're cute, but they're not as effective. So the ones that I'm showing you in the picture are the most common ways. So if you need to display something, you can obviously overlay the data, the actual data set on top to see the actual numbers or walk orders or whatever that might be. But if you're trying to, again, go with that guiding principle of seeing the trend or seeing something as a system, then those two principles, such as color intensity and the size of the bubble or a graphical object, are probably the most effective ones. Now, yeah?
Question on geographical maps. Do you have, a lot of people in the public and elected officials like to see geographic maps. I personally kind of have been squeamish about them because they tend to guide people to very irrelevant conclusions because of the noise that can be conveyed through areas that may not have that many people. If you're conveying percentage, it's essentially treating area as the most important factor versus population. I guess, do you have guidance for, ways to make it more useful? And obviously, the one on the left does a bit more of that.
Well, it really, we need to look into that example, that specific example, because the devil is in the details in the whole case with the data. But generally speaking, yeah, sometimes geographic maps are overused, and instead you can as effectively use a table or a bar chart to tell you exactly that. It's just that when you do need to combine the geoanalysis, or you want to spot a trend, and you kind of need to operationally understand sort of certain things in the context of geography or latitude. I mean, geoanalysis has phenomenal applications just in the context of executive decision-making or performance management. Let me tell you, there are better ways to display it. But in the context of other uses, absolutely. You just need to, again, understand the objective of the dashboard and what is it trying to solve for, and then look for what are the top 2 candidates to display this information, and then based on testing, figure out which one is the best. Sorry, I couldn't give you the silver bullet here, but all right, infographics. Very common right now, a lot of it. Infographics is a specialized form of visualization that combines words, pictures, and charts to communicate a particular message, or at least it ought to be. I've noticed a trend with a lot of budget documents doing the infographics, which is spectacular. Some of them are better than others, but why infographics is cool? Well, it draws our attention. It actually makes people read certain things. And it does communicate a certain message, and it's the goal of infographics typically is to inform, persuade, or to teach and move people to action. So it's very useful medium, and to qualify as infographics, by definition, it must inform. So what's the difference between infographics and visualization, data visualization? Infographics is self-contained and discrete, and the information presented with context and their sensitivity, as well as who the audience is and how the information needs to be displayed and what message needs to be displayed. The data visualization is a completely different beast in the sense that the data cannot be tampered. It has to be flat, straight data. Infographics is somewhat biased, let's put it that way. And of course, there's lots of data points and charts that could be used as a part of your infographics, but they're two different things. Now, we're getting to almost the end of the theory. Analytical interaction. The effectiveness, again, of the dashboard, and I've probably said it in many different ways and many different words, but the effectiveness of the dashboard is determined by how effectively, accurately, and clearly it can communicate the information and our ability sort of to interact with that data, because the dashboard needs to be at a summary level and then there's an analytical interaction. So oftentimes folks don't even know what that means. Static dashboards are a thing of the past for the most part. So we're talking about mostly interactive dashboards. And the way that we interact with dashboards, they actually have terms for that. You can call it, your own ways, but there are some technical terms. Like for example, accessing details on demand. So be able to click on the measure. If it's a yearly aggregate number, you may want to click on the detail to see the monthly breakdown, or sorting the numbers high-low or based on a certain criteria above, within the range, etc. Comparing, adding variables on the fly, data brushing, which is the ability to filter and pass the parameters directly from the graphical object to the data point. It's called brushing. Zooming, highlighting, aggregating. So when you interact or when you create dashboards, especially modern dashboards, not only you have to figure out what and how to present the data, but you also have to think through the analytical interaction. What would people want to see and discover and analyze from the top to the lowest level of detail? So there's a little bit of a challenge there. Now, there's many more. Now let's go to the dashboard implementation methodology that works, that we have gathered based on the experiences of working with many of you and commercial organizations, just pretty much our 5-step type of process. It always starts with determining information needs. Really, kind of stating very explicitly and very concretely, what is it that you are trying to solve for? If there are 5 of those goals, then state 5 of them. If there's one, then it should not be high level. Measure performance. No. Well, performance measurement is a slightly different piece. But bottom line is, when you create a dashboard, always start with the objective. The objective of the dashboard is to analyze sales, daily sales, or gross margin, or whatever that might be. You have to be very explicit with what the objective is. And then from that, peel down to specific sort of information users, if you will, and what are their objectives at a more granular detail. So start at the top and then work your way down. Now, once you've discovered, okay, this user may have this perspective, this user may have this perspective, then you have something. You can look at, going from a statement, sort of the objective, statement of the need, to a metric that it supports. For example, okay, I need to be able to track gross margin. Well, what is gross margin? How is it calculated? Do we take into account rebates or discounts? How is it compiled? How timely the data for discounts? And what is the formula? So that you're working from the objectives and sort of these high-level statements to actual measures, and measures being very simple measures or more complicated measures, being quantitative measures or qualitative measures, like a yes or no on a survey, for example, that you might conduct, citizen survey. So proper metrics is important. And then, of course, select your visualization objects. This is where we're going to start we have the measures or the metrics, and we know who our users are and what we're trying to achieve. This is where we need to start crafting how this might look like. How would I structure my screens? What would be my landing screen? What would be my supplementary screen? Or what kind of analytical interaction might be needed, etc. So it looks like a lot of work. But did you notice there's no word of let's go and start doing it in the tool? It's all done right here and on a piece of paper. Every time I recommend students when we do classes in visual design, or our consultants, or our colleagues, customers, I'm always saying, start with a piece of paper. Do not touch the tool, period. Just start with a piece of paper. Okay, what I just said works in some cases, but there's another approach to things, such as getting a technology that allows you to do visual discovery, and then playing with it and discovering patterns. This is a little bit more for real data scientists that already are very comfortable with the tool, and for them it's not a constraint and they know how to sort of to work with it. So there's two approaches. One is like this formal approach to where we know exactly, or we're sort of working towards goal, and the second approach is like playing with the data and seeing what we discover. So both approaches work, but for the dashboards, the typical dashboards that you guys work on, the first approach probably will work best. Now, once we've selected our visualization options, the next step was automate your dashboard preparation processes. And not just the display of the dashboard, but the dashboard preparation processes. What I mean by that? Dashboard technologies these days not only allow you to display the data, but automate the collection of the metrics. Everything from data gathering, interfacing with other systems to collect metrics, to creating a calculation, storing the calculation, storing the relationship between data. If it's manual metrics, such as the ones that you know, it's going to take you forever to get an interface into your police system, or they won't share this, right? Or certain metrics that you know you can't collect from the data internally, you have to go somewhere else. Maybe it's a benchmark measure, or maybe it's a citizen survey or some other survey. Those are the metrics that are you going to collect manually. For all that, you still need to have a process, an automated process, because if you don't automate, or technology does not allow you to automate and streamline that process, then your dashboard is not going to get frequently updated, or it's going to be not presenting the latest and greatest numbers, or it's going to be sort of artificial. It will be a pretty display, but the process itself is not automated, if that makes sense. And then finally, incorporate dashboards into business operations. You can't just roll out a tool and hope that people will come. You really have to explain the value, and you have to do your marketing job, and you have to do your understanding and rationalization of roles and responsibilities, and how that's going to impact not just the technology itself, but the fact that this information is now being displayed, and there are certain actions that need to be performed. So you understand, it needs to be incorporated into your daily routine and into your roles and responsibilities and certain performance reviews, etc., etc. So I just had little keys here to effective dashboard initiative. Proper definition of target audiences. Who is it? Which kind of stakeholders? Departments or citizens, etc. Well-designed metrics, simplicity and manageability of the design, proper data infrastructure to support dashboard data, and sustain leadership and change management. And of course, there's some dashboards questionnaires you can utilize. I think I'm done with the first part, and I might need Philip's help. Yep. How we're doing? I see some people are. Any questions at this point while we're setting up the second part? Oh, we're out of time. Okay. Sorry.
We have time for one or two quick questions, and then we'll ask that you stay available during the networking break. If someone wants to see a demonstration or speak about applications in the jurisdiction. And you can continue in the space. And now, Mike, thank you. Sorry about that. And then thank you so much for this presentation. Yana is from Neubrain, which is one of two of our presenting
sponsors for this conference. The other is Cigna, and I believe I saw Mike out there towards the back. Thank you. I would encourage all of y'all to take a moment and introduce yourselves to our presenting sponsors or our other sponsors, Davenport and NGT, our longtime sponsors. They are what make sessions like this, as well as us able to bring in, like Dr. Nalbandian and others, for sessions that have been a new part of our conference, and they seem to be very well received. So thank you for doing that, and I hope that the session was beneficial to you, and enjoy the break. We will be back here in this room at 10:45.